All right, players, what's happening? As promised, another one of these album of the year videos. It is 25 past 3 on whatever the fuck day it is, Thursday, 23rd. Got some Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. Cheers. God, that's delicious, isn't it? And some water. So, before we dive in, it's been an absolutely, in my opinion, bumper year for stuff. I guess it's kind of it's sort of been the year where a lot of people had the entirety of last year to work on a lot of creative stuff with the pandemic and things. So I think that's really kind of come to fruition in some of the releases that came out this year. Instead of top 20, I've got top 25. Because I felt it was just so hard to cut down, and honourable mentions, the latter of which I'm going to skip through quite quickly because otherwise, bloody day. But firstly, hope you're all doing all right. Obviously, I miss you all very, very much. And just thinking about missing you all, let me stop. And yeah, hopefully everyone's able to have the Christmas they kind of want to have this year, apart sort of in contrast to the bleakness that was last year. Anyway, enough of that waffly shit. Let's dive right in. So, honourable mentions. Oh, by the way, I've got headphones in because I think it will record the audio better, so you'll be able to hear. And I'm also now recording on my phone rather than my laptop, so hopefully the quality is also better. Because man alive, that last video was grainy as fuck. Okay, so let's dive in. Honourable mentions. Jesus Christ. Okay. Iron Maiden, Senjutsu. I mean, you all know how I feel about Iron Maiden. I think this is probably the best thing they've done for a long time in terms of like a cohesive album. It definitely has kind of vibes of like Brave New World, and there being a lot less kind of filler and stuff you'd skip on here. It's still really long. Obviously, they're not in the business of doing kind of condensed stuff these days. But if you like Brave New World, I'd give this a go. It's definitely a bit less immediate, but I think it is definitely their best work. I mean, the consensus generally with it this year has been it's been their best work since Brave New World potentially, and I would agree. I'd say it was a really, really strong Maiden album. And I mean, it's just it's mental that they're still going in the way that they are. It's crazy that they're still putting out like the quality that they are, and also not giving a fuck to the extent that they are when they're, some of them are pushing 70 now. And they're just they're just an institution. They're just great. They haven't gotten into any controversy. None of them have been to rehab in the sense of it being, there's been no, they're sort of such a bastion of steadfastness that I think you just always need to throw a shout out to Maiden. Some key tracks on here if you are interested. Bloody hell, I've written it all in Japanese on the back. Very unhelpful. Are Lost in a Lost World, that's really good. The Writing on the Wall, which is the single they released, which is also really good. And I would then go into Death of the Celts. Got a very Klansman vibe, but is really great. And then the last song, which is Hell on Earth, which is really, really good. So if you're looking for stuff to dive in on. FYI, I've made a playlist of 3 songs from each of the top 25 albums that I've done this year that I'll share after I've shared this video, so you'll be able to check that out. And that's kind of a mixture of, their sort of tracks to get you into it, but obviously, disclaimer, all of them are albums of the year, so the entire album is worthy of your time and attention. But yeah, honourable mention, Iron Maiden, St. Jesse. Check it. Next one, Full of Hell, Garden of Burning Apparitions. So Full of Hell are really tough. Like, they are a tough band. You've got to really put in some time to listen to them and get what they're trying to do. And once you get what they're trying to do, which is essentially an exploration of noise, they are a kind of metal band in the sense of they're like a grind noise band with sort of hardcore roots. And they're just tough. Like, it's just really, really tough music to listen to. This, however, is their most accessible, I think. So their output is ridiculous. They've released an album every year, I think, for the past 7 years or something stupid, whether it's collaborations with people like The Body or Merzbow or people like that, or just their own stuff. But I would definitely say this is their most accessible, and it's not for every day. It's not your everyday listen. You're not going to pop it on when you're just cooking dinner. But if you are in the mood for oblivion, check this out. It's really good. It's really, really good. And they are consistently good, but you kind of got to know what you're going into before you listen to it, so that you can prepare yourself to listen to it, if that makes sense. So it's really, really tough listening, but in terms of everything they've done, I think this is the most accessible. They've got an amazing song on here called Reeking Tunnels, which I'd definitely suggest listening to start with. What else have they got? They've got Reeking Tunnels, and they've got what's the other really? Oh, Industrial Messiah Complex. So give those two a listen to first if you want. It is really, it's tough, but it's rewarding when you know what they're trying to do, and very much then fills a particular niche when you kind of realise what that is and can then go to it when you want to. So, yeah. Oh, shit. You'll notice, by the way, that I've bought a lot of vinyl, or more vinyl, this year. My rule has been, like, I don't want, where I can possibly avoid it, I try not to buy dual case CDs, so I don't have that like horrible crappy plastic. I've just got cardboard. The irony and hilarity of it is I have no way of playing vinyl. Hilarious. But also it's meant that I've still ended up having to buy some dual case CDs as well, because sometimes they're only released in that format. So whatever. But yeah, Full of Hell, second honorary mention. Third one, Bodies by AFI. I really like AFI. They're just, I think Matt Malcolm and I chatted, and just the way we sort of described them was they're such a classy band. And I totally agree. I mean, they started out as a proper kind of Californian hardcore punk band, and they've kind of gone through a transition now into sort of like I guess they're kind of like a goth rock band really now, a la The Cure, Depeche Mode, all that sort of stuff. That, you know, that's written all over them really, and for their last 3 or 4 albums, they've had that vibe. So that's sort of where they've settled into now. but doesn't sort of necessarily mean that they're not great at doing that. And I'd really recommend this. Their last two albums, the album before this, the Blood album, was really good as well. And definitely the best version of that kind of goth rock vibe that they've transitioned into. So I'd really recommend checking out this album, which is Bodies, or the album before that, which is the Blood album, for the best version of new AFI. If you want to go into classic AFI, and you haven't yet, listen to The Art of Drowning, because that's an absolute banger. And people always go to Sing the Sorrow, but I would actually say December Underground is better. Personally, I think it's a better album. So that's a bit more of their kind of like emo-y stuff, I suppose. But this is just like every song is an absolute banger. Should it be on the list? I mean, it's too late now. I've made the decision, but it's just really, really good. They got some amazing stuff on here. Twisted Tongues is great. Looking Tragic is great. Tied to a Tree is great. Escape from Los Angeles is kind of like quite punky, like just really good. Like they're just really good. They're really consistent, and they are just as I sort of said before, they're just kind of like a classy band. They've aged quite well, and they sort of know what they're doing and are happy to do it. Although Davey Havok is a pretentious knob, who's the singer, but in quite a funny way. I mean, he doesn't think he's being funny. He's being really pretentious and thinks like he's like some sort of great artist. It's just like, all right, mate. But he can write a tune. So AFI, Bodies, third honourable mention. Fourth honourable mention, The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die. That is the band name. And this is their album Illusory Walls. So this was on the list for a long time, the final 25, and I removed it because it was... I listened to it recently and it isn't as consistent as a lot of the other releases, and so therefore not really fair to put it on the final list. But it's still really good, and I would say that it's a great... I mean, it's the album I've got into most of theirs. So they're kind of like a new wave of American emo indie. So they kind of sit alongside bands like Piano's Become the Teeth, their later stuff, the Hotelier, that kind of scene, which is sort of, it's kind of like emo indie stuff. Really good. The Americans do that really well. And for a long time, these guys were like a massive ensemble band and had like loads of violins and shit like that. And I think with this album, they haven't really done that. They're more of a sort of traditional 5-piece, 2 guitars, bass, drums, singer band thing. But the cool thing about this album is they've essentially got an entire album, normal sort of regular length songs between 3 and 6 minutes. And then the last 2 songs are really long. So the penultimate track, Infinite Josh, amazing name for a song, is about 11 minutes. And the song after that is 15. And they're kind of like, I guess, exploratory pieces in terms of like, they're kind of progressive, but they do it quite well. So I think it deserves a shout out just for what they're sort of trying to do. And I think it's their first album in a while as well. So I think it's a good album. I said it's not consistent at the beginning, and it's while it's not consistent, it's still very listenable in terms of putting it on, and sort of listening to it all the way through. We've got 2 singers, a girl and a guy, which makes it like quite cool. Invading the World of the Guilty as a Spirit of Vengeance is a fucking banger, and Infinite Josh is really, really good as well. And it's like it's like well constructed in terms of an album, You can see that they've really put a vision into like God, what's the word? Structure. But it didn't land when I re-listened to it as much, which is why it's not on the list. But it's still definitely worth your time if you're feeling that sort of thing. So sort of like sensitive Americans. If you're feeling sensitive Americans, put this on. Okay, and final honourable mention is Thy Catafalque, Vadak. So this is... it probably should also be on the list. Man, lists are hard. I don't really know how to do it. I've agonised over it this year. It's been an absolute nightmare. But so this guy, the guy who is essentially kind of the leader of this band, is a Hungarian. I think he now lives in Glasgow, called Tomaz someone. And he makes essentially like quite avant-garde metal, really. But man alive, there is so much great stuff on this album. Also has a female vocalist who does quite a lot of stuff. It's essentially its skeleton is black metal, but he brings in like Hungarian, Eastern European folk kind of influences. He brings in some kind of like jazz stuff, like some orchestral stuff. Great melodies. The songwriting doesn't suffer at all. He like every song is just really, really great. Even though he's throwing like everything in the kitchen sink at almost every song, and it's got a real like vibe to it. It's got like a... that's the guy right there. Look at him, the smooth bastard. It's just got a real yeah. Oh, it should be on the list, really. Fuck. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, it's really, really brilliant and very different to anything else you'd probably hear, which is quite a good recommendation. So, Thy Catafalque, Vadak. Okay. So, let's get into the top 25. So, hold on. I'm just going to eat proper shit. So, number 25. Lucy Dacus, home video. For those of you who do not know who Lucy Dacus is, she is a singer-songwriter for I think the East Coast. I think she lives in like Pennsylvania or somewhere now. But I first knew of her because she is part of the supergroup Boy Genius, which is Phoebe Bridgers, Julian Baker, and her. So I'm a big fan of Phoebe Bridgers, and real fan of the Boy Genius record. It's really good. So I bought that actually earlier this year, and then I was like, oh shit, Lucy Dacus is releasing an album, I'll give it a go. And it's really, really good. It's kind of indie folk, singer-songwriter stuff. But all of this album was essentially based off her old diary entries. So she went back and looked at her the diaries that she'd written when she was a kid, or well, I say when she was a kid, when she was kind of growing up to sort of where she is now, and used them to underpin a lot of the songs, and it's really, really kind of like observant, I guess, like some great observational stuff. And some really kind of sad stuff on here as well. There's a song on here called Thumbs, which is on the playlist, which I'd really recommend. Like, it's such a tune. which is about essentially her friend and whose dad comes back to town, whose dad essentially isn't on the scene, and then comes back and kind of tries to be like a dad, but obviously he hasn't really been around. And it's about Lucy going with her friend with him to dinner. And it's such a good song, like it's so brilliant. Um, but loads and loads of good stuff on here. Um, but yeah, as I said, I put 3 songs on the playlist so you can check them out. Brando's a like a real tune, great chorus, and she's an interesting. So she's queer and she's also adopted. So her parents are quite religious, and she was adopted from Mongolia. Um, and I think one of the songs on here is about her mum or meeting her birth mum or something like that. And also, the last song is about. Is it the last song? Yeah, the last song's about kind of how essentially her and a friend growing up kind of didn't realise that they were kind of in love with each other, but their parents did and tried to separate them and stop them like going around to each other's houses. But then she writes a fictional ending to the song, so like half of it's true and half of it's like a fictional ending to it. So it's just really cool. It's like it's really like it's really well constructed. It's got like some great melodies. Great album to put on in the background, but also a great album to listen to with intent. And she's just really cool. She's super rad. And I'm actually going to see her next year, fingers crossed, COVID wise. So I'm pumped for that. But yeah, Lucy Dacus, home video, number 25. Number 24. I might actually swap this out with Vadak. You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to. It's my list. So Vadak's number 24. I've already talked about this. So just put that in there as that. This album can be the honourable mention. So I've just swapped it around. So this is Wolves in the Throne Room, Primordial Arcana. So for those of you guys who don't know who these are, they are a Pacific Northwest black metal band. So they are 100% American wave of black metal or American black metal as of the last 15, 20 years. They've been in this around for a long time. And to be quite honest with you, I haven't actually been a huge fan of them. I sort of take or leave it really, the stuff that they've done previously. But this album it's just like a prime example of great Pacific Northwestern American black metal. And there's a lot of that around. Often a lot of it's based around the Southern Lord record label. And a lot of the bands who make that type of music root it very heavily in the Pacific Northwest. So this album is essentially a distillation of the Pacific Northwestern rainforest in kind of audible form. So if you want that, I'd really recommend listening to this. Oh, shall I keep it in? Maybe I'll keep it in. Okay, ignore this. This is number 24. Ignore what I said before. This is number 24. There's just too much fucking good music around. Yeah, so would really recommend it. It's great from start to finish, the whole thing. And yeah, as I said, it's a real kind of like mood album. It's just like you want to hear the sound of the Pacific Northwest. Listen to this in terms of kind of rainforest. And they for a long time, they did a really cool thing where on stage, I don't think they do it so much anymore, but when they first came out, they did an amazing thing, which was like they only played with firelight when they played stages. So essentially they had no lighting, and they just had like like braziers with like flame in and shit, and like only firelight lighting their shows, and they always played like in robes and shit, and it was just cool as fuck. Whereas I haven't heard of them doing it recently, but maybe they do still, I'm not sure. But I think, yeah, they're properly, and they record all their albums in like a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and it's just, they live that shit basically. So Wolves in the Throne Room, Primordial Arcana, check it out. Song on it, Mountain Magic, Spirit of Lightning, Through Eternal Fear, like everything's great, and as a whole, it's a brilliant thing. So check it out. Let's just put these like this. What was that? 25, 24, 23. My boy Ben Howard, Collections from the Whiteout. I've always been a fan of Ben Howard. I think he's really great. Ever since Charlie and I lived together in the flat in Finsbury Park, where I first discovered his first album, Every Kingdom. I've followed what he does, and I think he's brilliant. This is probably the best all-round Ben Howard album that he's released to date. So he's quite experimental within his kind of genre of like folky rock stuff, basically. His first album, which essentially everyone who loves Ben Howard just likes that and likes nothing else he's ever done, to the point where I saw him live once and people started shouting for all the songs off his first album, and he was just like, no, fuck you, I'm going to play all the songs off my second album because that's what I've just made, and you guys can listen to that in your own time, which I thought was great. But he's sort of really gone, his first album was kind of very like, for want of a better phrase, like surfer folk. Great, like really, really great, but it was very kind of like, I suppose it was quite upbeat. Second album was really dark. It's actually probably my favourite of his. It's like really dark, and like he used electric guitar a lot more, and did sort of a lot more kind of soundscapey stuff. Then his third album, what's his third album called? Noonday Dream, was sort of a bit more sparse, I guess. It's my least favourite of his, but this Collections of the Whiteout from the Whiteout is, I think, the best of all of those three albums combined. So and also by that measure, a really great place to start with him if you haven't ever listened to him before. This album was also produced by Aaron Dessner, who is the guitarist of the National, does essentially every big indie album ever now. He did Taylor Swift's most recent two. He's just around being that guy basically of the moment. But it was co-written with him. Actually, was it produced by him or co-written with him? Maybe both. I'm sure. But yeah, as a result, it's just a really, really great Ben Howard album. Every song's a tune. Takes real elements of his kind of like British-centered folky rock stuff, and has that kind of Britishness and sense of place, but then also combines it with some like a bit of soundscapey stuff. It sounds a bit more contemporary than his first album, and kind of modern. Just really, really good. And also he sort of does a few different things on it as well, which I really like the song Buzzard and the song Rookery are kind of like little, almost like musings, I guess, rather than full songs, but they really work in the context of the whole thing. So yeah, 23, Ben Howard, Collections from the Whiteout. He's a good boy. 22, Pupil Slicer, Mirrors. This was a proper kind of, I guess, surprise in a way. Like this was a album that I just bought to test out, to check it out, and after hearing kind of a bit of a buzz about them, and it's really, really good. It's like the mathcore album, which of the, I guess, the new kind of generation. It's like, so if you are fans of bands like Converge or Botch, or kind of that like frenetic, quite heavy, all over the place math, core metal stuff. This is like an up-to-date version of it, but it's also got like a real rock and roll like undertone and edge, so which makes it a bit more accessible than some of those bands' stuff. So again, if you're not familiar with the style of music, I'd say that this is a good place to start with it. From Bournemouth, I think, and I know a lot of you watching this will be from Bournemouth / that neck of the woods. So represent. I think they live in London now, but originally I think they're from Bournemouth. The singer and guitarist is fucking great. They're only a 3-piece and they sound much bigger than that. Again, I've put the tracks on the playlist so you can check it out. But they've just got some amazing bits in their songs, and they kind of go all over the place, but it's also just like really cool. Like the whole thing is really, really cool. One criticism of it would probably be that it's a bit too long, and they could have edited some songs out to make it a bit more of kind of a bit punchier and sort of a bit more. But I mean, it's literally their first album, so you kind of got to give them a bit of leeway with that. But I'd really, really recommend this if you're looking for something to literally rip your face off. Pupil Slicer Mirrors, number 22. Is it 22? 23, 24. 20, yeah. Number 21, Poppy, Flux. So Poppy was actually, her last album was actually on my end of year list 2 years ago or last year. Maybe it came out last year. Can't remember. And this is her kind of doing essentially a like 90s alt rock album, which I was a bit skeptical at first because it's just that whole thing of like artists who try their hand at loads of different stuff, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But this is so good for what it is. The whole thing's brilliant, really catchy, great melodies, very, I suppose, true to the source material, but because she's quite unique, her voice is quite unique, and she has quite a unique way of doing stuff, it sounds like quite fresh. Lessen the Damage is an absolute banger, as is Bloom. Her, So Mean, just, it's only 8 tracks long, but it's or 9, is it? 9, sorry, but it's really, really good. And like, if you're in the mood for kind of like rockier stuff, but that isn't like metal or a bit more kind of alt, I guess, for want of a better word, it is literally alternative rock, then this is a really, really great album, and you'll 100% be singing a lot of the songs on it because it's really, really catchy and really good. And she's just really, really cool. Like, I really like her. Her whole thing is a vibe, and also a really, really good advert for kind of people who have come up through social media. Like, she basically started on YouTube, and it doesn't take away any of her kind of credibility in terms of the stuff that she does and her ability to write songs and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I would say that it's just what it does is it makes me quite excited for what she does next, because I feel like she could potentially just pull out any genre and do it really well. So that's really cool. So yeah, Poppy, Flux, number 21. Is it 21? I'd get so lost. Number 20, Sleep Token, This Place Could Be Your Tomb. Become Your Tomb, sorry. Sleep Token were my album of the year before last. So they released an album called Sundowning, and that was my album of the year 2 years ago. This is their second one. Second albums are notoriously difficult, but I think they did an amazing job with it. It's a lot different to their first album in the sense of they definitely take more risks with this. So they're quite a hard band to describe. I'd say they're kind of like grandiose pop metal ish, like it all centers around the guy's voice. The guy who's sort of the linchpin of the band has got an amazing voice, and everything is built around that. Um, but it works really, really well, and his voice is amazing. Um, and he takes a lot more risks on this album, which is I always really appreciate, even if it doesn't necessarily like pay off cohesively as an album. I think it's always good to do, because you know that potentially the next album will be really good, or those things will sort of solidify. But it also does have some songs that could have easily fit on their last album. Love You Want, for example, is like that, and Alkaline. But then they've got songs like Mine, Atlantic, Fall for Me, which is a totally a cappella kind of Imogen Heapy, Bon Iver sort of thing. And then a couple of others like Telomeres, High Water, and Missing Limbs. Missing Limbs is like a little acoustic thing to finish the album off, which they haven't done before. Like, it's just really, really, really cool, and very unique because of the guy's voice. So I'd really recommend this if you haven't listened to Sleep Token already. And if you like this, then go back and listen to Sundowning, their first album. They also released 2 EPs called 1 and 2, which are also all worth a listen. And they've released a couple of standalone singles, like a song called Jaws, which is really good, and then a couple of covers, Hey Ya by Outkast and things like that. So it's the guy's really interesting, and we've seen them quite a few times now, Charlie and I, and they're just great. They're just a really, really cool band, and I would highly recommend checking this out. Sleep Token, This Place Will Become Your Tomb. 21. No, 20 that was. 19. I'm just going to double check. Hold on. That I'm on the right track here. Yeah, that was 20. 19. Okay, great. So 19, The War on Drugs, I Don't Live Here Anymore. For anyone who doesn't know these guys, they are essentially an amalgamation of every 80s heartland rock band / artist. So there's like Tom Petty in there, there's like Eagles in there, there's just all of that kind of stuff. They are sort of like the updated modern version of that. And they've been around for quite a while. Kurt Vile used to be in them. If you know who Kurt Vile is, he's a kind of singer-songwriter guy, a bit kind of alternative. Kurt Vile used to be in them, but left quite early on. And my issue with them, I've always had, is that their albums were very inconsistent. Like, I liked like 2 songs, and they were great, and then the rest was just like, I can literally take or leave this. It's really dull. On this album, I think they've got as close as they can to, like, for me anyway, in their kind of canon, this is the closest to the most consistent album they've done. There's still a couple of songs I'd probably be like, I don't need to ever listen to that again, but 90% of this is just fucking gold. And it's just really, really good. Great for driving at night. Chuck it on. Great for making dinner. I've put it on a lot when I've made tea recently. But also great for having a little bit of kind of an introspective look into your soul and worry about your life. Just like there's a sort of real sweetness to it, because it is that kind of heartland, like everyman vibe, or every person. But it's also so well done that you can't help but think like, yeah, okay, I'm sort of on board with this and I want to listen to it again. Essentially, so the first 4, 5, 6 songs are like just brilliant, like one after the other. It's just like, fucking hell, this is great. And then, I mean, even it is really good as an album. there's just some songs that don't land after you've had a run of 6 amazing songs, and it kind of just peters out in the middle a little bit, but it's still like good. An Occasional Rain is an amazing song to finish on as well. So yeah, Adam Grundersill is the guy who is sort of the ringleader, this guy, of it, and it's just really, really good, like sort of soulful heartland American kind of rock, but done really, really well, and also done to the point of it's sort of pushed a little bit further, I suppose. Like a lot of the songs on here are like 6-7 minutes, so it sort of allows a bit more time for there to be kind of like instrumental stuff or piano to be thrown in there now and then and things like that. So it's just they kind of elevate it a little bit, I think, anyway, as opposed to just like Forever Young and all those sort of songs that are kind of very much what they are. This is sort of a bit more, for want of a better word, progressive, but not really, but sort of. So yeah, number 19, War on Drugs, I Don't Live Here Anymore. What are we on? 18. God, dry mouth. So 18, Gatecreeper and Unexpected Reality. So Gatecreeper are a very good death metal band. They released an album 2 years ago called Deserted, I think, which I do have somewhere. I can't find. Which was sort of essentially hailed as this thing called like stadium death metal. So it was like really accessible, kind of fun death metal that was like groovy, although death metal has been groovy, but like that was just like kind of bringing in a new audience to the genre. And this was their kind of lockdown response album. So it's called An Unexpected Reality, and they have sort of done a bit of a black flag here in doing an album which is side A, if it was on vinyl. Maybe it is on vinyl, I should get it. Although I actually don't mind having death metal, like shit dual case CDs, because this feels like that's exactly how they should be. Sort of just a bit ratchet. Anyway, but yeah, so they've essentially got side A is 7 songs, all basically sub 2.5 minutes long, super quick, super brutal, like essentially like a hardcore punk album of death metal songs. And then the last song is like a 15-minute opus that's kind of like quite doomy. And it's following, I can't remember what Black Flag, they sort of took inspiration from the Black Flag album that does the same. I can't remember which one it is. It might be My War, but I honestly I can't remember. There's a Black Flag album where it's essentially that. It's like really, really fast hardcore punk songs and then one really long song. And they sort of took inspiration from that to make this. And I think it's just really, really good. Doesn't outstay its welcome. Just cool, like... It sort of, I would put it on in place of any hardcore punk album, actually. And in fact, there was a... God, where is it? So, this Every Time I Die, who were kind of like a hardcore punk metalcore band, released this album, Radical, which is really good. Not in any of these lists, but still worth a listen. But I would rather listen to this because it sort of fulfills the same... It sort of fills the same hole, in the sense of it being like really frenetic, loads of ideas, but like you just want to like grind shit out, and there's this. But there's something about this that sort of draws me more to it than this. But it's interesting because normally you wouldn't put these two genres together and they wouldn't necessarily be able to swap one in or out for the other. But with this album, they've kind of made that possible, which I think is really interesting. If that makes any sense, probably doesn't. So yeah, so number, what was it? 18. Sorry, I've got my laptop on in the background so I can fucking learn how to count. Number 18, Gatecreeper, Unexpected Reality. Really, really good. Number 17, Dark Throne, Eternal Hails. So Dark Throne are one of the oldest and most quintessential metal bands, black metal bands ever. Um, they were around in the second wave of Norwegian black metal. They released essentially um, some defining albums of the genre, which is sort of Transylvanian Hunger, A Blaze in the Northern Sky, which is probably the most. If you're likely to have heard of one and don't know them, you would have probably heard of that one. There's another one as well, which I always forget. But they're sort of the three albums of the genre that's kind of like they're like seminal, lauded forever, etc. But sort of since then they've gone on like a real journey. So it's only two of them, Fenris and Nocturnal Culto, and they've sort of gone on a real journey. They've released a shitload of albums. This is like their 21st or something, and it's ranged from kind of black metal initially to death metal, more traditional heavy metal stuff, like doomy stuff, they kind of explore a lot of the different corners of the genre. But with this, it's like a really good distillation of all of it. So it's kind of doomy. There were just some really good straight up metal riffs. There's some black metal related stuff in there. But the thing that Dark Throne have always had is the cult vibe. So that's cult spelled KVLT, which is like a very nerdy sort of elitist way that people talk about like black metal. Is just like, is it cult? Which means, is it like legit? And they've always had that vibe, and it's like really underproduced, garagey, just sounds kind of like shit, but that makes it sound awesome. And this album's got that like in spades, and it's just so fun. Like every single song on it, there's only what, 6 songs? Yeah, there's only 6 songs on it, all quite long, and just in every single song, there's bits where like a riff kicks in, and you're like, yeah, fucking right. And like, I think that's what makes it so good. Plus, it's got an amazing album cover, and there's a song on it called Hate Cloak, which is the coolest name for a song ever. So yeah, would really recommend this. Even if you don't like black metal, doesn't matter, because it's not a black metal album. It's essentially a heavy metal album. It's like distilled heavy metal. So honestly, check it out. It's so good. And it really grew on me as well. Like I listened to it a lot, and it climbed higher and higher up the list from actually not being on it at all. So yeah, Dark Throne, Eternal Hails. There's also a bit in one of the songs, I think it's Hate Cloak, where it goes, Eternal Hails, and the riff kicks in, and it's just like, bow. It's so good. So yeah, check it out. Number 16, Kralis, Demonic Wealth. So I suppose going to the polar opposite of the last release, this is very much black metal, but it's the way I describe this album is, so they're an American band from New York, I think, and the way I describe this is, it's like a sci-fi soundtrack, but it's a black metal album. And that's the only really way I could describe it properly, because they use synth and electronics loads, but it's still blackened as all hell. But there's something about it that sounds really spacey. Like, to me, in my head, it sounds like the alternative soundtrack to like Blade Runner 2049, or one of those sorts of like kind of creepy sci-fi films. But man alive, is it good. Like, it's really, really cool, and it's such a vibe. The whole thing is such a vibe. It's got like just a real feeling about it. The vocals are mixed really low, so you can't really understand them. I mean, as much as you can understand them when in kind of black metal screaming and stuff, but it adds to this sort of like backgroundy, soundtracky feel to the whole thing. But so much of it is it's just great. It's really good. Folds of Plasma is amazing. Mass for the Strangled is amazing. Dilution is amazing. So the second song on the album, where it's basically just synth, but yet still manages to be an incredible kind of black metal track. Just really, really impressive. I'd never listened to them before. My mate Rory was just like, "You need to listen to the new Krallice album because it's amazing," and he wasn't wrong. So yeah, if you're in the mood for something like eerie, it's an eerie album, like really weird. But if you're in the mood for it, it really sits right. So yeah, would really recommend it. Krallice, Demonic Wealth. Oh, we're blasting through them. What are we on? 15. Just take a quick sip. Something completely different. 15 is Silk Sonic, An Evening with Silk Sonic. This totally floored me, to be honest, because I did not expect to love this as much as I do. So Silk Sonic are Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak. Bruno Mars probably know who he is. Anderson .Paak is a rapper, and it's their 70s love letter project, basically. So it is them doing they're doing 70s kind of funk disco stuff so fucking well. And I love this so much, and I've listened to it so much. It's they've trod such an amazing, like, incredible line between not being pastiche with this or cliche, but making it yet sound kind of contemporary and current. And they've done it so well. And I just recommend listening to the whole thing. It's a perfect example of how fun music can be. And that's all I can say about it, really. Like, it's just fun. The whole thing is fun. But it's done so well. And if you watch any of the videos and stuff, like, it's all full 70s. They've got like the get up. I would recommend watching some live performances as well, because it's all so true to the time, but they just do it so well. I really like Bruno Mars anyway. I don't like his like early stuff, was like hand grenade. Can't be asked with that. But I like I like his most recent, his album before this. So I really like 24 Karat Magic. And he's just a total legend. Like, he can write songs, he can play loads of instruments, he can sing really well. He's just like a proper like dude. Way better than some of the other people who kind of sort of the names that are bandied around with his. So I think I really like him, and this is just brilliant. I'd honestly listen to it and have a fucking great time, because you will. Also put it on when you're cooking, because it is so good. Put 3 tracks on the playlist again. But yeah, it genuinely makes me smile, and that's such a great endorsement for an album. So yeah, Silk Sonic, what number are they? 15. Silk Sonic, An Evening with Silk Sonic. It's also narrated, the album is narrated by Bootsy Collins of, just 70s funk fame. So yeah, it's so good. Number 14. So this album is by Youth Code and King Joseph. So it's a collaborative album, and it's called Skeleton Key in the Doors of Depression. Incredible name for an album. And this was like a really early one. So it came out quite early on in the year, and I'd already always known of Youth Code because they're sort of around. They're sort of, I suppose, part of kind of the alternative music scene in a way, even though they're essentially EBM, which is electronic body music, which is a sort of subgenre of electronic music, but they're sort of also a hardcore punk band. So it's just the band consists of a singer who screams and can sing, called Sarah, and a guy, can't remember his name, who programs, who's a programmer. And so there's no guitars, there's none of that involved, but yet they make almost hardcore punk music, but it's also all electronic, so it's quite danceable. So it's a really, really interesting, the really interesting band. But for me, before this album, they didn't have the songs, so they were interesting. In my opinion, they were interesting, but I would never have chosen to put them on because I that wouldn't have sustained. It was like, oh, okay, cool, this is an interesting idea, but then it didn't really sustain past that. Whereas this, which is, as I said, in collaboration with King Joseph, who's also kind of another artist in that space, sort of, not quite the same, but sort of, um, and it's properly. It's properly sold me, and again, as with a couple of these albums, if you want to find somewhere to start with Youth Code, start with this album. So I ordered the vinyl when it first came out, and because of all the vinyl shortage and stuff, it only just arrived like last month or something, even though it came out in January or February. But I'm really glad it did because it's cool, and the whole thing is great. It's such a fucking rager of an album. And manages to be really heavy, but 99% of the time it's electronic, which I think is just really, really interesting. King Joseph's vocals are great. Sarah's vocals are great. The programming, is exceptional. And on Head Underwater, Matt Pike, who was in the band Sleep and he's in High on Fire, he does like a guest solo and plays like guest guitars and stuff. But the whole thing is brilliant. It's really, so there's quite a lot of I suppose it's kind of a bit industrial in it, which they haven't done as much. So it's like there's some sort of quite early Marilyn Manson-y, Nine Inch Nails-y, Ministry-y sort of choruses on here, which I think really work, and kind of add to that industrial vibe. So I think this is like a really good, while also still kind of being quite Youth Code in terms of what they have been before. But I think it's just really brilliant. And yeah, if you don't know anything about this sort of music or this band, check this album out because it's just really cool. It's only 8 tracks again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 8 tracks. So it doesn't outstay its welcome, but it's just an absolute killer. Like so good. So yeah, 14 Youth Code and King Joseph. Can't forget old King Joseph. 13 Churches, Scream Violence. So never had ever listened to Churches ever before. Quite sort of, they've been around. They're quite a big band before this year, but they released this, and I was like, oh, check this out. I think it came up on Spotify or something, and really, really fell in love with this album. I thought it was so brilliant, and I don't really know if there's anything else to say, to be honest. Like, it's just really cool. Like, incredible pop melodies. Again, loads of really great like programming and kind of electronics on it. But this, as far as I understand, I haven't gone back and listened to any of their other albums, but as far as I understand from stuff I've read, it's kind of like one of their darkest albums, which is probably why I enjoy it. And those melodies and the kind of programming stuff have a real kind of darkness around the edges to it, which I really think is great. The song Violent Delight is quite a good example of that. Like, it's just really, like, it is quite dark, but it's it's also really poppy, well written songs, just cool, like great production, um, and the whole thing is brilliant. Um, is it? I think it's How Not to Drown has Robert Smith on it from The Cure, so that kind of gives you an idea again of that kind of like slightly darker tinge to pop, I suppose. Um, and I'm really, yeah, just really impressed and really like interested in kind of following them from now on, because I think I'd never heard them before. The only thing I knew about them was they did a song for um, what's it called, Death Stranding, the video game that a lot of people did songs for. Bring Me the Horizon did one and stuff, and they played at the Game Awards, and it like looked pretty cool. Um, and they had like a cool get up, and they obviously like enjoy, like they were talking about how much they enjoy video games and things like that. So that's the only thing I knew about them. And then they released this year, and I think this is an absolute, just a great one. Just, yeah, really really recommend it. Churches, Screen Violence. Number 13. In kind of not too dissimilar vein, I suppose, number 12 is London Grammar, California Soil. Again, another band that I'd never listened to before this year. Knew of them, they were obviously quite a huge band. Listened to this and was just blown away by this. To be honest, I thought like this thing, and I still have listened to it pretty much consistently all year. It's so fucking good. As I said, I knew nothing about them before this year, and this has really, really sold me on them as a band. Similar to Churches, they're kind of quite relatively poppy, sort of quite a mixture of kind of electronic stuff and guitar-based stuff. I suppose indie would probably be the word, but with these guys, and what places them higher than Churches in the list for me is that the whole thing has a real vibe. So like the whole album is, you know exactly what you're listening to when you listen to any song on this album, and you know it's from California Soil, and you know it's London Grammar, and it's almost like it's the same. It's not the same song, but it's almost like it was written as one continuous piece of music, and I think that's really really clever. I'm just gonna open the window. It's hot as fuck in here. Oh, that's better. Yeah, and the vision of this is really really great. And you just chuck it on, and it goes through, and you can just press play again, and it'll go through again, and it's just a fucking mood, and it's amazing. Um, the singer's voice, I forget her name. Fuck, I've forgotten her name. Anyway, her voice is just the best thing ever. It's like guzzling, warm, hot chocolate. It's just such a like satisfying voice to listen to. It's so full of like melody and emotion and stuff, and it's just so much of like that Sleep Token album. The music is written to kind of accommodate her voice, but it's just brilliant. Um, and I love it so much. It's so good. So yeah, London Grammar, California Soil, number 12. Number 11, Bess Atwell, Already Always. So this was a super late addition into the old list. So I only found out about this album 2 weeks ago when Noah Gunderson, who I'm going to see next year, announced his support for the tour next year, and it was her. And I was like, oh shit, I'll check her out. And she is so great. So she I think she lives in Brighton. It's like really great British indie folk, but so brilliant. All the songs sound really really timeless, like you've kind of known them for ages, and they've been around for ages and been written for ages, which I always think is a mark of a great kind of folk singer songwriter. Sort of can weave their songs into the fabric of the land, I guess. She does quite a few different vocal styles on the album, which I think is really cool. And it's just really, really great British folk album. Like the whole thing is amazing. Every song, it's just kind of like a perfect folk album, really. So I'd really, really recommend this if you're in the mood for that sort of thing. It's not quite as like experimental as Ben Howard or anything like that, but it's like if you want a sort of a more trad, for want of a better word, folk album, best out like indie folk album, Best Out Well, Already Always, number 11, absolute rager. It's obviously not a rager, but you know what I mean. Number 10. Humanity's Last Breath, Valde. I think that's how you say it. So this again, really early. This came out in January or February, like it's really early on. And I think when you're making these kind of lists, it's hard to. Often they get weighted towards the back end of the year because that's the stuff you're listening to, like more recently, so you're like, shit, yeah, that I'm really into that. But I made quite a conscious effort this year to go back to the stuff I was listening to earlier and seeing if it held up now. And this is one of the albums that definitely did. So it's the way I can describe it is it's the soundtrack to the Gates of Hell opening, and that's the only way I can describe it. It just sounds evil as fuck. The whole thing is just evil. It's got such a vibe. And that's all I can think of when I listen to it. It's like the Gates of Hell opening and like Satan's hordes of demons descending upon the earth, just raping and pillaging and just making a nuisance of themselves. And this is the soundtrack to that, and that's great. So I think if you're in the mood for that, listen to this. It's essentially, I mean, for want of a better phrase, it's like a deathcore album. So deathcore is kind of quite a maligned genre these days. It's sort of what Bring Me the Horizon started, and then there were sort of bands like Suicide Silence and what's the other one? The Acacia Strain, Amur, like those kind of bands sort of ran with it, and it's essentially kind of like taking death metal stuff and making it very simple and like all about like beat downs and things like that. And this is essentially, they started out as one of those bands, but this is like a true elevation of the genre. Like there are still some of those kind of tropes in there, but they're few and far between, and it's much more kind of really interestingly put together, loads of really interesting little bits and pieces to kind of create this like evil mood. There's one track, for example, which like has some kind of like riffing guitars and then stops, and then there's like this horn that sounds, and it sounds like the horn of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, and makes it just sound like shit. There's like an army coming to like destroy my face. And they do it so well, and it's like as I said, it's an elevation of the genre 100%. Big riffs on this album too. Just it's a real mood, and it's so heavy. Like it's just heavy. The last song, Victoring, that you can hear on it. You can hear the it opens with a riff that's just like, which doesn't do it justice, but it's essentially like he's playing the riff slowly, that you can just hear the pick scraping on every string, and it's all super down tuned, so it just sounds like you're getting bludgeoned basically to death. So I'd really, really recommend it. It's so good, and I've listened to it so much, and it's just evil. Like the whole thing is just evil as fuck, and that makes it rock and roll. So yeah, Humanity's Last Breath, Valde, number 10. Number 9, Snail Mail, Valentine. So this was another new one for me this year. I hadn't listened to anything that Lindsay, so that's the girl who is Snail Mail, has done before. She's only released one album before. But this came out and I played it pretty much for a week straight. It's so good. It's like for me. I think it's the best indie rock album of the year, hands down. It's just brilliant. I don't really know what else to say about it other than everything on it is amazing. It kind of conjures up the like thoughts of. I know she lives in New York because all the interviews and stuff I read with her say that, but it really kind of evokes like a New York feeling. And that sounds really weird, but in terms of sort of, I don't know, like you can imagine listening to it in a basement, in a warehouse apartment in New York, which makes it sound kind of a bit frivolous and cliche, which it's not at all. That doesn't do it justice. But it's got a vibe like that, which is effortlessly cool. And I think that's what I'd say about this album is it's just effortlessly cool. Like the way she writes songs, the way she puts kind of different bits and pieces. She does interesting things like bridges and vocal melodies, and like there's just something about it. Like throughout, there's a thread of just coolness throughout the whole album, and I love it for that so much. So I'd really recommend this. Like out of any indie rock album stuff that I've mentioned so far on this list, if you listen to one, listen to this one, Snail Mail, Valentine. Number 8, Mouth Breather, I'm Sorry, Mr. Salesman. So this again came out quite early on in the year, and has just held up so well across listening to it over the whole year. It's so brilliant. Really kind of, I don't quite know how I'd describe it. I mean, the artwork is so good. It's kind of like, it's like a mixture of kind of like hardcore, like grindcore, metal, punk, sort of stuff. Like it's really heavy, it's really chaotic. I suppose it's kind of, if you were to place it anyway, you'd place it on like a hardcore bill maybe, or a grindcore bill. But again, like there's so many ideas in every song on this. Really interesting sort of stuff thrown into songs that are about 2.5 minutes long. And it makes it, it's one of those things where it's just like there's more ideas in this than like a prog album and things like that. This is one of those albums, I think. Every song's like 2 minutes long. Like it's really short, but the amount of stuff that goes into each of them is staggering. And some of the riffs on it are not only incredible but just really interesting and cool. There's one on Wasted Science where they do a breakdown, but it kind of ascends. So it's like the guitar's going like again, sounds a lot better than that. But within the context of the song, it's just like you don't expect it or see it coming, and you're like, what? That's so weird. Like, why would you choose to do that? But it really, really works. And I think like there's stuff like that all over this album. And it's a really, really good one for just raging out to. If you want something heavy, it's just a great album to chuck on. It doesn't, as I said, it's quite short. It doesn't outstay its welcome. And they also do a really cool thing where, so you can see here the titles of each track. Each title of each track is referenced in the following track. So wasted life, they say in this track, and it carries on all the way through, which is just really cool. So you think there will be a bit, and it's always at parts where you'll immediately take notice. So you're like, oh shit, am I listening to Wasted Life? But you're like, no, I'm listening to Cotton Shot, which is just like this. And there's stuff like that in this album, like everywhere. It's just all over the place, but really interesting and really well done. And they don't like. This should get way more recognition than it does, I think, because it wasn't on any end of year list this year, which I think is just criminal. Like it's so good, and they, for some reason, they had like a real issue with getting it on Spotify for some reason. So like I bought the CD from America because I wanted to buy the music. I bought it from Bandcamp, and it arrived before I could listen to it on Spotify, which I suppose is quite a nice way of sort of a bit of a flipping the modern world on its head in that sense, like kind of back to the old days of just cracking on a Walkman. So there's something quite cool about that. It's on Spotify now, but yeah, I really love this, really love it, and it's a go-to album for me. I think it will be for a long time for what it is. So yeah, Mouth Breather. I'm sorry, Mr. Salesman. Bloody great. I'd love to see them live. I think it would be just carnage, but I think it'd be great. Number seven, my boy Noah Gunderson, A Pillar of Salt. God, it's glaring, isn't it? It's shining all over the place. I would have bought the vinyl of this, but the CD is signed, so I just bought that, even though it's a jewel case. He's just always going to be in any end of year list for me. I love him. I think he's brilliant. I discovered him first on the Sons of Anarchy soundtrack, and sort of I've just followed everything he's done since. And he's like our generation's Ryan Adams without the weird sexual assault stuff, in that he's able to write kind of just churn out amazing songs all the time, but it's kind of speaking to our particular age group, because he is our age. So for me, I feel like a lot of the stuff he says like resonates a lot, essentially. And this album is just great. Again, it's sort of a product of lockdown, in the sense of it was released this year. I think he had it written beforehand, but he managed to get like Phoebe Bridgers on a song and things like that, which I think maybe wouldn't have happened if lockdown hadn't happened. He's just, again, kind of timeless American singer-songwriter, really. Like, the songwriting's great. But it sounds more, it's not just like guitar and person. It's a bit more going on, and he's a bit more tuned into kind of, I suppose, pop music. And so a lot of the production on some of the songs and the use of electronics and things like that, kind of, they sort of speak to that a little bit. They don't make his songs like really poppy, but he knows what's going on in kind of the musical world, and doesn't sort of resist it, I guess, which is interesting. So I think, and this album's a really good example of that. This one and the one beforehand, the album before this, Lover, his two most best examples of that. I'd really recommend listening to that as well if you haven't. Whereas where he started off being much more kind of like guitar, vocals, and that's it, sort of vibe. Whereas now there's just more, he does sort of a more, like, production-wise, there's a bit more going on. And I think it really pays off, and kind of separates him from a lot of people who do similar stuff, as well as the fact that he's just a fantastic songwriter. So I think this is, just listen to it. It doesn't matter if you like that sort of stuff or not, just listen to it. It's brilliant. The song with Phoebe Bridgers on it, Atlantis, is a proper stop what you're doing, because nothing else matters in the world other than this song. So listen to it. Noah Gunderson, good boy. Number 6, Emma Ruth Rundle, Engine of Hell. Maybe the coolest name for an album of all time. So this is Emma Ruth Rundle was actually runner-up last year, in her collaboration, in my albums of the year, in her collaboration with Thou. And this year she's always done, all of her work, including her solo work, has always been quite sort of electric guitar heavy. I mean, she has an album called Electric Guitar One, which is an album of her essentially just fiddling around on electric guitar and making kind of like weird soundscapey stuff. So she's always had like an affinity with like electric guitar, and she's always had like a massive pedal board that she's made and all that sort of stuff. But for this album, she basically took all of that away and like stripped it all down, and it's just guitar and her playing guitar and singing, and playing piano and singing, all recorded live in essentially one take. So it's really raw, but it showcases how much of an incredible songwriter she is. She always sings about dark, depressing shit, which I think is why I love her. And this is no exception. This is really dark. She sort of left her marriage, all sorts of stuff, cut off all her hair. I think she recorded it in Wales, actually, this album. Spent a lot of time in the UK, which I thought was really interesting. And sort of has had like a bit of a kind of, not transformation, but has sort of definitely been through something the last couple of years. And it's sort of resulted in this album, which I think is just, it's so good. Like, it's so raw and vulnerable and kind of emotive, and just, yeah, singer-songwriter stuff. But yeah, it's either her with a guitar or her with a piano, and that's it. And as I said, all recorded live, and I'd really, really recommend it. It's not, the interesting thing about Emma Ruth Rundle is it's not at all poppy, which is, but it sticks in your head. So I think she's sort of quite interesting in that respect, where there's, you wouldn't describe any of her melodies as pop at all, but there's something about them that sort of really, well, with me anyway, really resonates. So I'd really, really recommend this. I mean, she's just brilliant. I love everything she does. Same with Noah Gunderson. It's just like, I love everything they do. Some is better than others, but this is kind of a really interesting direction for her, because the stuff she's done before hasn't been anything like this. So it's really, really good. So yeah, number 6, Emma Ruth Rundle, Engine of Hell. Engine of Hell. I mean, come on. Number 5, Carcass, Torn Arteries. How good is this? That's a heart made out of vegetables. So good. So anyone not familiar with Carcass, they are essentially like a British institution when it comes to death metal. They are just one of the forefathers of the genre. They're from Liverpool. They're all Scousers all hell, which is really funny. Not the Scouse people are funny, but they also kind of are. And they're really interesting. So they were sort of really prevalent throughout the 80s and 90s. Essentially broke up. Came back with an album called Surgical Steel, which I'd also really recommend. The album before this, which is fucking great. And then another 9 years went past, and then they released this. So it's sort of really odd. They're kind of, but the great thing about it is they're all quite old dudes, and they're just like doing shit they want to do. Like, I read an interview with the singer, and he was just like, "Yeah, I'd put an extension in my house. That probably made the recording process like go a bit longer than it probably would have done," which I think is just really cool. But they are essentially releasing the best material of their career now, which is so, I guess, rare for a lot of bands, especially bands like this. So the way I describe this is it's definitely death metal, but it's like the most accessible metal form of death metal you probably ever listened to. But it will also, what is interesting about it is if you listen to it, you're like, oh, this sounds like quite a lot of other stuff, but that's because Carcass invented that style. So they are like a true pioneer. Like, loads of them played in they were all around the time, like around at the same time as like Napalm Death. Loads of them. I think one of the Napalm Death guitarists played in. They swapped members. I can't remember exactly who it was, but they swapped members. Someone from who's now in Arch Enemy, a Swedish guy, used to be in Carcass. Like they're proper like bastions of the scene, and just proper. Just been just doing it, keeping it real for so fucking long. And then they've dropped this, and it's just so good. The last two, yeah, this album and Surgical Steel, they've got an album called Heartwork, which is often lauded as their kind of masterpiece. And I'd argue that this and the album before it, Surgical Steel, are better than Heartwork. Like it's fucking brilliant. So riffy, growly, catchy, like really, really catchy. Great British sense of humour running throughout it. A couple of puns in the song titles. One of the songs, so Eleanor Rigor Mortis, is a play on a Beatles song. Like just, you know, like loads and loads of great stuff, and just really worth your time if you don't know anything about the band, or you fancy kind of a heavier metal album. Carcass, Torn Arteries. Plus, I mean, come on, look at that. It's just the coolest fucking artwork. Look. It's so good. Yeah. What was that? That was number 5. Number 4. Okay. So number 4. Again, another album that came out really, really early on this year. Maybe even in January. And has just been constantly spun by me throughout the whole year, is Teenage Wrist, The Earth is a Black Hole. So these guys, relatively new band, I think only have one album before this. They started out as a kind of like a shoegaze band. So very kind of like sort of fuzzy, like ethereal vocals, like kind of more on the kind of poppy side of it, but like generally a shoegaze rock band. Then the lead singer left, and this, I think it's the guitarist, became the singer or something. Whatever. They had a lineup change, and then they released this, and it's just the coolest rock album ever. Like I haven't heard a rock album that's been this good for a long time. Like just a straight up rock album. It's so brilliant. Just massive choruses, like makes you feel like you kick anyone's ass. Driving along with it on, you feel epic. Just put together amazingly, and just as a rock album, it's for me. There's been nothing that's come close to it this year. I love it so much. Everything on it is amazing. It's just and it's cool. The guy's voice is cool. The songwriting is like it's just. Plus, look at him. One of them snugging a rabbit. So yeah, you just want a rock. You want to put on a rock album. You want to be able to sing along. You want to feel cool. Listen to this. Teenage Wrist. The Earth is a Black Hole. Number 3. Second. Is it the second? Yeah, the second collaborative album on here. Converge and Chelsea Wolfe, Blood Moon 1. So this is a really interesting record. So basically, there's a festival in the Netherlands called Roadburn, which is it's like if you're a cool person, if you're someone who likes metal and is cool, and what I mean by that is like, essentially, I mean, there's probably loads of wankers that go to it, but like in theory, if you're slightly more intelligent than the metalheads that go to like Donington and drink ale out of a horn, you would go to Roadburn. And Roadburn is like a curated festival. So they will have artists in residence, who will curate the bands playing, you will have bands doing special set lists, bands playing albums in full. Like, I'm desperate to go. No doubt there'll be some wanky people there, but ultimately it's like the metal festival for people who have a brain in their head and don't want to listen to Disturbed. And this album essentially came out of a performance at Roadburn, which was Chelsea Wolfe and Converge doing kind of like a collaborative set list. And they then recorded it over the past year or so and put it into a record. Although they wrote stuff, so when they did it at Roadburn, it was like reimaginings of each of their own songs, whereas this is a kind of new material. But also the guy, so it's Chelsea Wolfe, Converge, Stephen Brodsky, who was in Cave In, who was like a kind of East Coast like mathcore band, along with Converge, but he was also in Converge for a while, and Ben Chisholm, who is Chelsea Wolfe's writing partner, basically, and writes all her records with her. So it's all of them are on this record, and it is really fantastic. It's super varied, so it's like it. Some of it is like a bit sludgy. Some of it is kind of like spaghetti westerny. Some of it's like rock stuff. Some of it's kind of quite Converge, which is like frenetic math hardcore stuff. It's some of it sounds like Opeth. Some of it sounds like Porcupine Tree. Some of it sounds like, I don't know, like Jimmy. Like it's just all over the place, but so cohesive, so interesting. Like I've put it on and just played it again and again and again and again and again and just looped it. And every single time you find more stuff, and it's so good. It was my album of the year, and I swapped it out for another one, but it could easily still be the album of the year in a year's time. I might think it is. Like it's really fucking fantastic, and it's not too much of each of those elements that I've mentioned, which makes it, I think, such a hypnotic listen. Like, but it also, the whole thing has a real feel about it that to me is really kind of rootsy and like mystical and like sort of foresty. So you can just imagine like hanging out in a forest and shit going down and listen like the full moon and whatever, and you're listening to this, and it's got that kind of vibe. But it's also just got so many other influences, and it's just, I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's just such an amazing piece of art, and yeah, I just don't really like. It's one of those albums that you listen to and you're like, I don't understand how you made this all together. Like it's staggering, really. So it's not too metal. It's not too like folk or too pop or anything like that. It's like it just is. It just is what it is, and I'd really recommend listening to it. Out of probably any of the albums on this list, I'd recommend listening to this because it's just so interesting, and that's probably the best way to talk about it. So yeah, number 3, Converge and Chelsea Wolfe, Blood Moon 1, and a fuckload of other people. Number 2, getting to the near at the end. So this is King Woman, Celestial Blues. This album was there's basically been 2 times in my life where I've been compelled to listen to an album, as in like almost physically pushed to listen to it. The first time was when I was listening, was like when I was at school, and Under Oath released an album called Define the Great Line, and I listened to that album once, didn't understand it at all, and I then sort of was just like, don't understand this, not going to listen to it. And there was literally a voice in the back of my head, and it was just like, listen to that album again. So I put it on in the car, and that album essentially I credit to being the album that taught me how to work at listening to music. So if there was something that I listened to that I didn't immediately like, but felt like was worth my time, I would put the time in. And it also opened my eyes to listening to more, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, like abstract music. So it didn't follow like verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus. It was like weird. Like the song structures were weird. They didn't really have a chorus. All of this sort of stuff. It was heavy, but it was like disjointed. And I suppose that goes hand in hand with the whole thing of like listening to, putting the time in to listen to stuff and understand it. And so that Under Oath album, which I'd really recommend if you haven't heard it, Define the Great Line, I credit with essentially allowing me to enjoy the music that I enjoy today. And the second album was this album. So I listened to this because it got a bit of buzz earlier this year, and I listened to it once at work, and I was like, no, I'm not fussed about that. And then I went over to do some boring stuff at work, like stuff envelopes or something. And there was literally the voice in the back of my head again was like, listen to this album again. There's something like you're missing. And so I did, and it became one of my favourite albums of the year, and could easily be album of the year, really. I always think the top three in any album of the year list could just be interchangeable, and I agree with the same for this year. This is so I just don't really know how to. It's heavy. It's a really heavy album, but not in a heavy way. So it's like, and it's also a really violent album, but not in a musically violent way. It's more to do with the kind of tone and Chris's voice. So King Woman is one of the projects of Chris Enstefani. So she's an Iranian American, and she does all sorts of stuff. So she's got a rap kind of persona called Dalmatian, which is like scary rap. She's in a band called Sugar High, which is kind of like a shoegazy, more euphoric kind of rock band. She's in King Woman. She does all sorts of stuff. She's super cool, like just an absolute fucking legend. And she's really interesting because she was raised in a religious cult. So like a really serious, like speaking in tongues, religious cult thing. And so this album she's mentioned is her kind of essentially closing the chapter on that. So it was like exercising all of the weird shit from that childhood in this album. So loads of it is religious themes. There's a song on it called Morning Star, which is a sort of basically an alternative perspective on Satan, which I'm fully on board with, which is this whole thing of like, he's just trying to do his best and he fell from heaven and he's now trying to do some other shit. And there's a song called Golgotha, which is obviously the hill that Jesus died on and all that sort of stuff. So it's loads of religious like iconography stuff in here, but it's also her kind of realising that all of that stuff and growing up in it was awful and like fucked her up. And it's just, her voice on this is just, she's one of the things that drew me to this album or made me listen again was her voice, because it was so unique and interesting and fits the music so well. And when you listen to her other projects, she's not singing, you wouldn't necessarily think it was the same person. So she's like developed a particular vocal style for this album, and it's just fucking great. If you wanted to genreize it, it's essentially a doom album, like a doom metal album, but it's not really. Like it's better than that genre, because I'm not a huge fan of doom, but it's its own thing. It's like her album, and she is just fucking kick-ass, and I love her so much. I think I can't wait to see what like the other stuff she does. But this album, Celestial Blues by King Woman, is so good. There's a song called Ruse, and she says the lines like, "Oh, it hurts, and it stings," but the way she sings it is just like, it's the chorus, and it's just so good. So yeah, I'd really recommend this album. It's just utterly brilliant. Also worth watching the videos for the two songs. So one of them is Psychic Wound, I think, and one of them is Morning Star. And Morning Star is just her, like in this. So she's got face paint on. She's like this. So she's like Lucifer with her wings cut off as the angel has fallen from heaven, and she's smoking. And the whole video is just a camera circling her, and it's just cool. Like, it's just, yeah. So King Woman, Celestial Blues. Check it out. Right. So this leads us to number 1. Hour and 40 minutes in. My throat hurts from talking, but I'll do it for you guys. My album of the year this year is Halsey. If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power. So this is... So I knew nothing about Halsey, really. I mean, Halsey's like a megastar. She's like a massive pop star. So I knew of her before this year, but I didn't know anything about her. I had heard her on a few, as like guesting on a few tracks. One of them was on the Machine Gun Kelly album, I think, and she was on a Post Malone song. And I'm not really a big fan generally of like guest verses on songs. Like, there's obviously this trend in pop songs at the moment. Like, a classic example is like Dua Lipa's song Levitating. Great song, absolute rager. But then it's got like DaBaby doing a verse on it, which, to be honest, I just think fucking ruins it, because he's just saying absolutely nothing. And I think a lot of these kind of pop songs with a rap guest star verse on it, it doesn't add anything. It just makes it worse, in my opinion. But in all of the verses that I heard Halsey on these songs, I always thought that she made them better. Like, she brought something to the song. And I think partly it's due to the fact that she's really good at writing lyrics. And she's a great lyricist. And so I knew of her, but I didn't know anything about her. And then the internet started saying that Halsey's latest album was produced by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are essentially Nine Inch Nails now. So, and they obviously do movie scores together. And it's all kind of, they very much have a vibe. So that was immediately like super interesting. I'm not the biggest Nine Inch Nails fan in the world, I have to say. Like, I think they're quite overrated. But I appreciate what they are. I appreciate the legacy they have. And I kind of appreciate Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross for being kind of the creatives that they are in terms of like scoring movies and things like that. So I was like, that's interesting. Like, it's interesting that Halsey, this kind of pop megastar, has chosen to do some work with them. So I was intrigued from that moment, basically. Then she released the album, and I thought it was I just thought it was like basically the coolest thing I'd ever heard. And I thought that the marriage of the two, as in like the two, Trent and Atticus and her, was so brilliant. So they're credited. She essentially wrote all the lyrics and the vocal melodies, and they did a lot of the music. So they're all credited on every song as writing every song together. So it's like Ashley Frangipani, which is Halsey's real name, and Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor. But I think what they've all created here is something really special. And I think it is an album that is essentially, I mean, people say like it's a genre-defining album. Genre-defying album all the time. But I actually think this is an amazing example of a genre-defying album. And what I mean by that is it is commercially popular and successful, so it's a pop album essentially. But you could put this on to any rock or metal fan or fan of alternative music, and they'd enjoy it. You could put it on essentially to any. You could put it on at any like club night. You might like think back to like club nights at uni. You had like the cheese night, the metal night, like whatever, and loads of these songs would sit in any of those spaces. And I mean, it's a dark concept album. Like she said that it's the album that she's always wanted to make. It's a concept album, and it's about essentially kind of the idea of like motherhood. So you can see she's had a baby, and like it's sort of like the darkness that comes with motherhood. Essentially, is what the album's about, as well as kind of her. So she's got bipolar disorder, and she talks a lot about mental health in a lot of her songs. So there's a lot of kind of her self deconstructing herself in it and things like that. But that's largely what it's about. And it's dark. Like the whole vibe of the album is dark and heavy and quite oppressive. But it is so clever in that it can sit in so many different spaces and hold those spaces. And I think that's just really, really interesting and cool. Every song on the album is incredible, and every single song is different enough from the next to be a surprise when you listen to it, but not so different that it doesn't take away from what you're listening to, or the theme of the album, or the flow of it, or the feeling, or the vibe. So, for example, there's a song on it called Lilith, which is essentially a rap song. And then there's a song called The Lighthouse, which is like a sludgy, doom, guitar-driven song. But they all feel like they're part of the same album. And every time you listen to the album, there's a song that comes in, and you're like, shit. It's almost like a little present every single time you go to the next track on this album. And I think it's truly stunning. Like, essentially, I think it's amazing. I've listened to it consistently all year since it came out. She also made a film, which is, I think, about an hour long, 50 minutes, but I haven't watched yet because it was only on like HBO Max or something, but now it's just come on like Google Play and Amazon and stuff, and I've just bought it. So I'm really keen to check it out, which sort of uses the sort of structure of the album to kind of soundtrack the film. I'm really keen to watch that out. Like visually, it's really, really stunning. The film looks really stunning, and I think she has sort of really not upped her game, because that sounds very patronising, but I think like it's nice if she's being true in saying that it's the album she's always wanted to make. It seems like she has kind of allowed herself to break free of the constraints of like being a pop star into something more interesting and something more than that. And I think that's really, really exciting, because I'm excited for what she does next, basically. So I think this is like a really stellar piece of work. And it's what I love about it so much, I think, is because I like wordy albums. Like, I like lyrics. I listen to music largely for lyrics, and her lyrics are fantastic and her melodies are fantastic. And so I think that's what has kind of clinched it for me in terms of like really enjoying this, along with production from Trent and Atticus. So it's just unsettling. Like it's not necessarily heavy, quote unquote heavy, but it's just, yeah, it's sort of unnerving. So so even when you've got a song that isn't, in her kind of melody is relatively kind of, I suppose, like a bit more kind of bouncy, there's stuff going on in the background that makes it more than that. And I just think it's really, really great. So yeah, I'd really recommend this. I think it's just so brilliant. And the vision of it as a whole, with the film, and like her speaking out. I'd really recommend if you like it and are interested in it, watch the Zane Lowe interview with her about it, because she goes into a lot more detail about how it happens basically, and how she came to work with Trent and Atticus, but also the themes she wanted to put across in it and things. And it's a really good interview. So yeah, I was really blown away by this. Like I just had no expectations. As I said, I knew of her, but I didn't know like anything about her really. And this has sort of sold me on me being a fan of hers, but also like really wanting to kind of follow what she does next and kind of root for her, because I think it's super brilliant. So yeah, number one, Halsey. If I can't have love, I want power. Right, friends. What a time. What a time that was. I'm going to go and have some marmalade on toast, because it's 5:20 and that's what I want to do. Hope you all have a great Christmas, New Year. I love you all very much. And yeah, as always, just give me feedback on anything that you've liked from this. Anything you listen to and you enjoy. Always keen to hear your thoughts and feedback on it. Because music is life, yeah. All right, players. Peace out. Bye.